thank you very much for joining me.
Yeah, it's good to be here. Good to see you.
And it's very good to, it's good to be. So, just before we start, would you like to tell us a bit more about yourself and what you do, I suppose?
You can see from my age that I'm semi-retired. I'm working with RJ4All as one of their directors, and I do occasional work with Theo and research work and lecturing. Before that, I have a history in restorative justice from the 90s onwards, and before that, in the ancient world, I was a police officer, but kind of converted. Okay.
Yeah.
And I've undertaken a fair body of actual work, face-to-face work of restorative work. I say restorative justice. I think the term is controlled by various gatekeepers in England and Wales, and I think we'll explore that as we go.
Yeah.
Because we're going to stretch the boundaries with hate speech and hate crime anyway.
Yeah.
So
absolutely.
let's take that forward. But that's me. If I call myself anything, I call myself a practitioner and maybe a researcher.
Okay, that's very good. Before we start, I'd just like to make it clear, if at any point you feel like we have said something, then feel free to just say it. If you would like to clarify, just please do. And if at any point you feel the interviews,
that's not a problem. Let's press on and try and get some interaction.
Absolutely. All right. So just to start, did you want to learn a bit more about this? Discuss a bit more about what we've been doing so far?
We've spoken already. You tell me what I need to know, because you could be here some time otherwise.
Yeah, absolutely. Just to keep it brief, we've been doing a series about hate crime and hate speech, as I've already said, but today we'd just like to explore a bit more exactly about more specific cases of how restorative justice can be used in mediating both cases of hate crime effectively. So
Okay.
All right, then shall we begin?
Let's go from there. Go for it. Yeah.
All right then. So just for the first question, in terms of motivations behind hate crime, what would you say the most common motivation you find is?
I really don't know, because but there's a specific reason for that.
Mm-hmm.
What I have found through the work is that once you start talking to somebody, there are triggers which release deeper emotions and prejudices which are strongly felt and may be discussed only away from the open world, so to speak.
Yeah.
So what a bunch of guys might say in a pub together, what you and I might do if we meet to reinforce our own beliefs and prejudices, would never come out at work, would never come out socially. It comes out, in my experience, it comes out after people have been loosened up by drink, maybe by drugs, but certainly by drink. That's when offending happens, or has happened, the worst offending.
Yeah.
To talk about hatred, I mean, it's you have to look at the definition of the word. It's a very strong definition, and when we talk about hate crime, it's not only a proven expression, but it's even a third party's perception of it makes it a hate crime, which makes it very, very difficult to define, and I think that's my problem.
Yeah, I can see that. Because it can be very dependent on what people decide it, and that can lead to sometimes people perhaps, would you say, maybe not oversimplifying, what's the word for?
Over-egging the pudding,
yes.
They put too much weight on it.
Yes, absolutely.
Yes. Okay. And if it's my business to look for that kind of thing, I will see it. Yeah. If you go, it was a sad factor with policing, that if you say to me, go out and patrol and look for car theft, I will look for people who I think are car thieves. Yeah.
Yeah.
It's like it's like the quotation that to a man with a hammer, every problem looks like a nail. Now, if I'm a worker in hate crime, I'll see it everywhere.
Yeah, absolutely.
And the person who has caused the offence may not see it, and truly may not understand it, and truly may not see the offence they've caused. Now, let's get back to restorative justice. As you know, the definition that we've been working to is really an ethos of working and getting people engaged in a dialogue with an aim of repairing harm. Yeah,
absolutely.
Okay. Now, that's what I work to, and that's I think what RJ4All works to. It's not what a lot of people within the UK, or certainly within England and Wales, define as restorative justice, but we'll come to that. So, motivation. Motivation is wide, goes back to our childhood, goes back to our experience. But it is, I think the main point is that it is deep-seated. Yeah?
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay. And I'd leave it there and move on, I think, because we'll unpick it as we get cases.
No, I understand that it's a very personal thing to people, isn't it? It's something that... Yeah, absolutely. I can see that, especially because, as you said, hate itself is a very passionate world, so it's it's very personal. All right, well that leads us on to our next question then, of how common would you say it is that cases of hate crime are preceded or incited by instances of hate speech?
Okay, again, let's be specific. If it's a hate crime, if it is a crime that's on the statute book, that it has been decided has an element of hate related to it, right? I've got I reminded myself by taking out the Met Police definition, and it's very broad, yeah. And the definition of hate is very broad too. It has to be preceded by something in the mind, but you can't prosecute for that. You can't deal with it. Does hate speech lead up to it? Is it something that people are going to talk about between themselves, have an argument before they get involved and commit the crime? Is it maybe it's not even expressed verbally? Yeah, because hate speech presumably has to be expressed. It may be there. We're trying to legislate here, or perhaps restorative justice system, but the justice system is. We're trying to legislate for something which is an intent or a belief, and that's pretty tricky.
Yeah, absolutely.
So I suppose there's probably be some hate speech somewhere, but it's not always verbalised. There could be an explosion and then an outpouring. There could be a crime which is committed without a word said. Again, are we looking for some causal link that hate speech leads to hate crime, or that all hate crime has hate speech involved, that we could stop it happening if we engage in a dialogue beforehand? I don't know. I don't think I can't say that every the hate crime that I'm aware of, I've actually dealt with, has hate speech involved with it, for sure. I can't say that.
Oh, that's fair. But I do think that's an interesting point to make, that perhaps there may be instances of people saying it quite loudly in their head, but then it kind of...
Yeah.
But then, obviously, that's not legally the same thing as...
You can't prove it.
No,
in fact,
exactly.
in legal terms, I think this whole field is very, very difficult to deal with.
Yes, I can...
Isn't it? How do you prove these things? You'll know the figures better than me. I suspect you're dealing with the tip of an iceberg in terms of criminal offences prosecuted that actually get to court and then that get proven. Yeah.
Well, with the data we were looking at, it was mainly that was what was recorded. Recorded being the operative word, because there's a lot of cases
which
that go
absolutely,
unrecorded, unspoken. for a lot of different reasons from what I found. Some was because some people weren't always sure they were actually hate crime, as you said, hate crime, because it's so hard to define. But also because some people, for I suppose their own reasons, didn't feel like they could go to the police at some points. That's a whole other thing. But there are a lot.
There's an elephant in the room here, and that is that the police nowadays are loath to record things as crime if they can avoid it.
They are.
And they are loath to prosecute crime if they can avoid it, for whatever reason. One of the things being the much quoted business that there are too few, and they don't have resources. And there are pressures put on victims to withdraw or not bother. Right? As we know. So if we were dealing with a perfect system where every crime was dealt with and recorded, it would make life easy. But we know that people, for a variety of reasons, are withdrawing, especially when they're told that they have to surrender their data and put themselves even more in the control of the suspect and the defence.
Yeah, absolutely. So what do you think restorative justice can offer both victims and offenders in terms of, I suppose, in terms of how can it benefit them significantly, whether it be in terms of their livelihood or their own well-being?
What you can do, is you can deal with the root problem of misunderstandings, and you can get a real repair away from the justice system if necessary. I know of one case. I have to be very careful, by the way, not to disclose.
No, absolutely.
So I'll talk around it. But I know of one case where an agency, shall we say, saw the problem. They saw the problem of something which was expressed in the workplace about someone who was very senior and would have had great difficulty in reporting it or dealing with it. Yeah. So they reported it, in fact, as they referred it as a restorative justice case, not as a criminal case. And that was dealt with very effectively, in as much as it was talked through by both parties, and the perpetrator, it's difficult to call them an offender because there was no declared offence in law. It wasn't reported. Although we can use that shorthand, I don't have a problem with it. It was difficult for both parties to face each other, but the dialogue worked, and an apology was given, and it was a question there of somebody who'd been brought up in one way, was used to a matey kind of freedom of expression within the office. Yes. Yeah. The word banter comes to mind.
Oh,
right?
Yeah.
I'm sure you've seen plenty of that.
Oh,
right?
boy, yes.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Well, it has wide parameters, does banter, and it strays, and that was very successful, and keeping it out of the court or away from the police was hugely successful. So you can do things outside the criminal justice system. You can do things, I think, at the end of the criminal justice system. So serious cases where we call it hate speech. Yeah, it was. I'm thinking of a kind of interfamiliar, two neighbours who'd been warring to and fro for some time. Okay, and it was in a London housing estate where, to say that race is an issue is both true but also absurd, because we're interracial, aren't we?
In many ways.
In many ways, and so I think if I looked at the different, if I tried to categorise the both families in both houses, it would take us about a week. Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. But racial epithets flew backwards and forwards.
Mm.
Okay, that was always an issue, and people's backgrounds, where they come from, was an issue. Yeah, geographically. Okay,
Yeah.
and this went to the stage where there were threats and gun threats, and it was heavy stuff.
Oh,
right.
Right. I see.
So you can say that they settled it subsequent to any police involvement, and in this case to the housing authorities' involvement as well, which was a major problem.
Before it escalated.
Before it had escalated. It boiled and was still simmering. Okay.
Yeah.
So it was and in fact they had tried formal mediation, right? So, and it was still simmering. It's like a long-running sore, isn't it?
Mm.
And a restorative intervention, in this case it was a long process of mediation, dealt with that, and I think it relates to one of your other cases about how, your other questions about what's the long-term effect.
Yeah.
Because that's quite easy. We could have a ding-dong now. I could say
Sure,
sure,
that
walk away, but if we met each other on the street, if we then get, if the fists start flying, it didn't do a lot of good, did it?
No, absolutely.
But and how do you measure that? But that worked. So it can work. It can prevent. It can settle matters in the long term. I think is where I was going. Whether it works in relation to the criminal justice system, I have my doubts. Okay, yeah, probably it could. And proponents of restorative justice will say, "Oh, you can use it everywhere, like a magic wand." I don't think necessarily that's the case. Do you want me to take that?
No, I really, yes, absolutely, because
I could see you sort of.
Well, no, it's because I completely agree with you.
Oh, right.
So I actually want to learn more about why you think that is, just because I kind of have my own reasoning.
Hey, I want to hear that. Shall I go first?
Yeah, you go first. I'll see if because you might say what I'm.
I might really upset you.
Oh no, not at all. This is
okay. Here's my feeling, and it goes back. So I'm drawing upon police experience and what I perceive to be the problem these days with both policing and from the Crown Prosecution Service. You've got to get results. You don't take anything through the court or put it there unless it's going to go the distance. Because the worst thing is a failed case, because it will haunt you to the end of your days. I know people that I worked with who 20 years down the line are now being interviewed by the National Crime Agency for failing to investigate the crime properly 20 years ago, right?
Jeez.
So police now are very, very careful about what they do. Okay, so they're only going to go ahead with certainties.
Because of the potential scrutiny.
But yeah, because of potential scrutiny, and if they don't want to get put on a shows trial when they're retired. Yeah, so they're very, very careful. They're covering themselves and each other. Likewise, the prosecution service. Nowadays, because of the fact that we live in such a heavily reported world, and everything is a matter of comment in the media, everyone's very careful, and anything can get blown up out of proportion. So everyone's very careful. So there's a great hesitancy, isn't there, to use it. The next thing is, especially with hate crime, where you look at the definition, as it says, it's an incident or a crime which is considered to be so by the people involved or a third party. Now, this opens the floodgates of what it is. The law is specific. That's the whole point of it. That's what we've got a judge for. Yeah, he's there to advise us on points of law. What we then do is we have opinion. Yeah, we're dealing with opinion, and we're dealing with people's intent and their beliefs, and you can't really prove that in a court of law. It's incredibly difficult. So the law wants certainty, and we'll go for it. It therefore does not want, and there is little place for in that criminal process, someone dealing with opinions. And if I'm a defendant and I want to be open and admit, because we say, don't we, that restorative justice, there ought to be some admission of acceptance of responsibility, not necessarily legal admission. Yeah. How can I do that with you? Sorry, I don't want to personify this.
No, absolutely.
But how can you do it with me if that then gets used in court as proof? Right?
I see.
Yeah. And we're also dealing with two separate things. I think restorative intervention can deal with that very well indeed. Yeah. And leads to apologies or explanations which are accepted even if they're not, they're understood if they're not accepted. But the more defensive and tighter the criminal justice system becomes, the less it wants to let in, or will it let in, opinion and mediation. That's my feeling.
Yeah, no, that seems like that makes a lot of sense actually, because if you want certainty, they may not perceive, I guess, restorative practice as necessarily having that same level of certainty as hard results would.
Mm.
Yeah, no, I completely.
You okay with that?
Yeah, no, that makes sense. That makes a lot of sense. No, I can see that. It's, in many ways, it seems like restorative justice kind of has to deal with the way the system is at the moment as well, amongst other things, because there are, well, as you've all described, the things like this need for certainty.
Yeah.
So it's I guess finding a place in that as well, which is a bit of a challenge at times.
Mm. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I totally see that. And just to really quickly say why I think,
yes,
I just imagine in some cases restorative justice may not always, I guess for some cases it just may not always be appropriate, I thought. Like there might be some cases where you really shouldn't just because the nature of the crime is so like perhaps too personal or maybe it just wouldn't be an appropriate course of action, basically. I can't give any specific examples.
Well, I could. And again, I'm with you on this.
Yeah.
There is a feeling. Do you know what I mean by the RJ movement?
Yes,
yeah?
absolutely.
That this is this is some wonderful panacea that we can take and make the whole world a peaceful place to live.
Yeah.
And there's not a single case that can't be dealt with by restorative means. And we don't need the criminal justice system. We don't need to hurt people. And the rest of it. There is a strong element of that, to which you can clearly see that I'm on your side with. It is not a universal panacea, okay? It really isn't, and some things don't belong there. And I have, from recent scrutiny work we did, I and my team on the panel, we were very worried by the number of cases where people were coerced into restorative justice and away from criminal justice, which was against their interests in terms of safety, and was usually just a much more convenient way to deal with the case, right? And that is very, very worrying.
Yeah, that's a very sinister side to it almost, is that use of it to force people into taking action.
But if you gave me, I don't know, several million and said, hey Ben, go and set up a restorative justice system, service, and we want you to go out and cure the world and do as many cases as you can, that's what I would go and do.
Yeah.
Well, I'd like to think I'd be good at it, but it means that people are motivated to try and call everything restorative justice and use it when possibly it's not quite right.
Yeah, yeah, that's unfortunate. I can imagine being a big side effect. Yeah, that when you put money behind it, that much money behind it, kind of, yeah, I can see that. That was a really good response. Thank you very much for that. And yeah, I very much agree with you, I would say. So the next question is, this is more, I guess, a practical question about how the process actually works. How do you go about setting up a conference, such as preparing for the dialogue between the parties?
I don't.
Okay.
Sorry,
no, that's completely...
Can I take the word conference out?
Yes, absolutely.
It is only, in my experience, across Europe and, well, to some extent worldwide, it only seems to be in England and Wales, certainly, that we are locked into this business that restorative justice means a conference. Okay? It happened because in the early days, the people who believed that it had to be a solid, tight conference with a script was the only safe way. They prevailed with government, and for a little while that's all that people would do was say, unless it's a face-to-face conference, we won't fund it. That prevails. As you know, I work with Theo Gavrielides, and his well-researched definition, which is that it's a working ethos, based on using dialogue, is the one that I have worked at. Well, I think I worked it before that decision, but we have common cause in that. And I think it's increasingly important in something like this kind of hate crime we're talking about, where people need to be free to say what they think, and they need to be able to say it to the mediator, to the practitioner, and to vent that on both sides before they meet, and hopefully they do, but it doesn't matter if they don't, because it's the end result that you want. It's the piece at the end of the process that you're after. And some of the best results I've seen, the parties have never met. And some of the cases, we're going on, I think you want to talk about power imbalance. Some of the cases we're talking about power imbalance, and that's very important in this, yes, as well. We tend to think about hate, we're thinking about race. That seems to be the driving factor, but it isn't just that. I think you can talk about gender, you can certainly talk about domestic work, and this new business of coercion within domestic situations, and domestic violence, you could say. And I remember working in a school where it was for the emotionally behaviourally disturbed children, boys mainly, and race was always challenged. Racial epithets, as soon as they came out, challenged, dealt with very well. Really very well indeed. Okay, I'm proud of that. But when someone suddenly went into a tantrum and went into slagging off a female teacher, the most vile stuff came out, because it was deeply entrenched. That's what they lived with. Yeah. And that wasn't dealt with so well. Maybe it was even more deeply entrenched. Yeah. So I'm trying to think of a case which would show this, that was dealt with. Preparing for dialogue. You have to allow people lots and lots of space. You have to have a trusting relationship with them before they're going to come out with this. So you want cases Here's a case where you've got a guy who's picked up by an ambulance. He's absolutely paralytic drunk. Standard issue, white guy in this town. Yeah. He gets taken into the hospital, and he was bad enough they probably pumped him out or whatever. Yeah, and then when he's relatively okay, they need more space. They say, right, on your way, throw him out. Yeah. So you know got a guy who's still residually very drunk. He's probably arrestable for that, but he's very drunk. He's no longer a case. He gets thrown out of the hospital. He's hanging around the ramp where the cases come in, and there are lots of ambulances coming and waiting or going and leaving. There's a guy there who is, I don't know if he's a driver or attendant, whatever, but he's an ambulance man. And he's blank. And this guy starts a rant. Oh. Right? Okay, yeah. And we're talking about really threatening, insulting behaviour. Yeah, heavy stuff. The police come, sweep him up, take him away. He gets charged with insulting behaviour, I think, as I remember. And I go to see the victim, as was my way, speak to the ambulance man, and he says, look mate, this is, I'm on my coffee break. I get this all the time. This is standard procedure out there on the streets, you know. And the way I deal with it is I don't bother. Now the court has said that they want to report on this. They've referred it as, you know, see what the effect on the victim was, which is a good thing. And they had the luxury of having a restorative justice work. We've now found that there's a very strong hate crime involvement here, and that takes the level of seriousness of the crime up to being racially motivated. And from being a starting point is now custody. Okay.
Right, yeah, it makes it considerably more.
In his case, that young man, if you'd have gone to interview him, or I did, he comes across as a very decent kid, well supported in a decent home.
Yeah.
Okay. And you probably go out drinking with him, quite happily, if that was your thing, you know. But once he had that level of alcohol, it released all that vicious, deep stuff, which must have come from, I don't know, talk around the table, stuff he picked up at school, mates he dealt with, who knows. But it's, I couldn't have put those two in a room together to start with. And frankly, the ambulance man wouldn't have wanted to be there. He just wanted to get on with some assurance the job had been dealt with. That's your job, mate. I'll clear the streets of injured people. You look after the ones who have insult me. And but you get a result there, but it isn't sort of wonderful, peaceful, calm with everybody, you know, hugging each other and forgiving each other over a cup of tea at the end.
Okay.
Right. And in terms of preparing people and preparing for a conference, it wasn't right. I can think of a few that were. Do you want one that was?
Yeah, sure. But that's very. I guess conference isn't the right word. We'll say dialogue. That sounds.
Dialogue. Well, I'm not fussy. You know.
Yeah.
Conference is fine. Intervention. Did one in a school where an incoming young Nigerian boy, a Nigerian family, was picked upon by a gang within the school of primarily, no, exclusively, Vietnamese boys. Yeah. And they just wanted to get it over and done with. The kid, although they felt the family felt the need to prosecute it because he had been hurt. You know.
especially when you're that young. It really
Well, that's
gets
right.
you.
That's right. They wanted him to feel that he could still stay in that school without being the one who pointed the finger. Yeah, you remember all those sorts of things from school?
Oh, yeah, definitely.
And the others, I learned a lot about the concept of face within the Vietnamese community. Fortunately, I had some very good sort of tuition there, and they needed to be able for the boys to say sorry without losing status and power. And it ended up apparently after we got everybody together, and you know, for that matter, you know, what's my experience of the Nigerian, you know, community and their discussions. It was very, very interesting to get those different groups together. But they did very well by a formal meeting. That worked very well. And everything came out. It was a question of teaching everyone with respect, giving everyone a lot of time. I couldn't do that according to a script though. And apparently what happened was the next time in the playground, the boys came over to him and said, "Come with me, son, you're with us now. You know, it's cool, you know."
Wow.
Which was actually, see, you're closer to school than I am. Yeah. That was what they needed. That's exactly what needed to happen.
Yeah, absolutely. To be accepted in.
Yes. So, and the school were really happy because they didn't have to kick the boys out.
Yeah, it didn't.
Right, because they would have said, "No, we do not tolerate," which is fair. You know, we do not tolerate any kind of incident like this here. And on the other side, they didn't want to lose another pupil. We don't go to that school because there are racial attacks there.
Yeah.
Right. And it ended up very well indeed.
So, would you say a big component behind whether or not deciding to have, I suppose, a restorative dialogue is a lot of cultural and social context? Because aside from the fact that contexts were quite specific, it was also the fact I think they were students of school, which I'm not saying. I guess what I wanted to say is that
you're talking about power base now. Yeah.
I was thinking more just because when you're younger, you kind of say things and you can sometimes say things, but it doesn't
mean anything.
Or you may not have to say, you may not really. So maybe dialogue kind of helps quite a lot in that context.
I think, well, you certainly need preparation, which goes back to the point of the question.
Yeah.
You can't just go rushing in and say, expect someone to ask a question in a conference open.
Yeah.
They need to know what the implications of what they're saying are, because it was misunderstanding those implications that got them there in the first place.
Yeah.
So we're talking about language, and we're talking about. We're also talking about the need for really good assessment before you start a case, which is often forgotten. It's almost written out of guidance now. You're going to get as much as a restorative practitioner through doing a decent assessment and deciding which way to go as probably from the process itself.
So, okay, I get that. It kind of seems like, if I might, maybe I'm oversimplifying it, but some of the key components of having a successful restorative dialogue are preparation, good judgment, and what? Okay, no, there was a third one I remembered. There was a third one. I'll come back to me.
Hey, it's my bugbear. For me, it's about assessment.
Yeah.
Okay, and listening to your needs. It's assessment of listening to the needs of both parties. But you have to remember that there is an imbalance of power in crime cases. And restorative justice is mainly about mediating crime cases, if you like. So immediately there has been a crime, per se, one person is an offender and the other person is a victim. So we've got an imbalance, right?
Yeah, because I suppose the victim may be afraid of the offender, depending
Well,
on what
sure.
or may have.
So we have to address that, and you have to, if you've got somebody who is in a sexual relationship, that one party is usually dominant, or they defer to the other party. You have to take that into consideration, and I'm not sure it's always particularly relevant to go down the restorative justice path.
Yeah.
For that reason, if you can't get the power balance right, maybe it's better done in the court of law, and we pick up the pieces around the edges if we can help. But I'm happy to look at any case. I think anyone has the right to consider restorative intervention, restorative justice, and my only right as a practitioner is to say, look, I can't do it for you for the following reasons, but if you find someone else, that's fine.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely, give your own judgment of what you may not think is good for their situation.
And not every victim is sweetness and light, you know.
No, absolutely.
Right? They might be, and I've had this. I had a case where someone was really viciously trying to use restorative justice as a tool to re-engage with somebody. I mustn't go into too much detail, but someone was serving a sentence, and it came, once I'd spoken to both parties, it became very, very clear that the person who was serving the sentence was the one who had suffered most within that relationship, and had reacted explosively in the instant that was prosecuted. Right? But the long-term relationship, the power balance was very much the other way.
In the other person's favour.
And the person serving the sentence did not want to go back or get involved at all.
No. And in that situation,
we have this classic idea, don't we, that with domestic violence of every description, with every sort of sexual relationship, that it's always the person who is the offender of the last thing that happened that is the instigator and is the person who's the offender in the long term. Usually it is, in the sort of, I say classic, in the almost routine domestic violence relationship, it's usually a man or a woman, and it's usually a man who's the long-term perpetrator. It isn't always the case.
No, absolutely.
And that means careful assessment, letting people speak, letting them have their say.
Yeah, because that's just the way it is, isn't it? Not everything's going to be as simple as people think it will be. Sometimes it's and I imagine as well, in cases of even in just some other cases of restorative justice, even the victim may struggle with it, as obviously being a victim of crime, I imagine, can really have a big impact on you. Sorry, I know this is a bit irrelevant to what you just said.
No, keep going.
But it's just a thought I've had where it's I suppose, being a victim of crime can also have a really heavy, so even if you might initially think it may work out, it may be that the victim might initially think it's good for them. They might get to the situation and be like, maybe it's not.
Look, if you break your leg, doctor sets it up, and it's sorted. You walk away, there's a lot of pain, a bit of trauma, maybe a lot of trauma, and you go away and you get cured. I have a limp for a bit of a while, maybe you carry that limp, maybe whatever. What we don't want is to have somebody keep re-breaking the leg and explain what the pain was like.
Yeah.
Okay? And the heavier the trauma, it's not for me to go in and keep, or anybody else, to go in and keep opening it and saying, well, I need to know what we're dealing with here. And then after it's been dealt with, in court maybe, we're now going to have a meeting where you're actually going to meet the person who did it and go through it all again.
Yeah.
And he's going to give you excuses as to why you do it. He might blame you too. Now, it's all really good to say we'll unpack everything and, you know, mediate it, and it's going to come good in the long run. There are things that you don't want to undo. And some people deal with crime and trauma by dissociating themselves, by putting it away. Some people want to put crime away, put bad things away. And you have to, and sometimes they'll come back to you. I had an abuse case within the family where the woman concerned came back in her late middle age, because the guy was now, her father was now doing it with grandchildren, with other grandchildren. Okay? And she said, no, just this has to be put to an end, and she prosecuted them. Now that split the family up because they wanted to stay with the family. It was painful for her. It actually worked because she got a decent apology, although they'd broken off a relationship, you know. And she went away content with the result. And he did too, as it happened. But that kind of thing, sometimes people just want to leave married, and you've got to allow that. It's not our job to open these things up unless they specifically want to do that. I
think it's, as you said before, it's very much about respecting the victim's wishes and assessing what they need.
Yeah.
Absolutely, and that's what, it's really down to what they want.
Are you concerned with measuring long-term effects?
I would say it is a point of interest, if only because I'm somewhat curious as to, I suppose, what happens after. I guess what's the word for it?
Look, you come with these kind of cases, in my experience, to a point of catharsis where you've been through it, and you could visibly know that we've arrived at the right result. That we've got as far as we wanted to go, and we're not going to do anything more. Yeah. For that specific intervention, that dialogue. Now, how far is our responsibility? How long are we responsible for this? If we got two families, two parties, do we monitor that? Yeah. I had a case where it was on an estate, largely African Caribbean gang on an estate, who had GBH'd a young guy who lived there because he was gay. And the thing was along the lines of the kind of one of the leader of this gang of guys was, someone said, you know, was again the banter, you know.
Yeah.
The story I heard, you were doing it with him over there, right? And he said, not me, I hate gays, or that kind of thing. And so to prove it, he GBH'd him. Or at least, maybe I think. Well, it doesn't matter, you know, he assaulted him, just to prove his dislike, okay?
Yeah, it's again that I suppose banter coming up again.
Swagger.
Yeah, it's...
That didn't actually go. We decided that, having done the investigation to it, that if we'd have tried to do certainly any face-to-face, that it would have made it worse for the young man concerned rather than better.
I imagine he would have been very scared.
Because I could have worked with the guy concerned, but it was the others in the team who would be looking to prove themselves by continuing to pick on this kid, and worse, right? And we came to the joint decision that it would exacerbate refer on and to pass those findings to the people who could look after where he was going to live. Yes?
Away from...
maybe away from there, or where the others were going to live.
Yeah.
Yeah. Or to have exclusion zones put in upon release, or to have orders taken out. But not that didn't put the blame, you take the blame off the victim.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's in the long term, so...
And that's the long term issue, isn't it?
Yeah.
Yes. He got over the treatment for the assault, but he and his mother particularly, they wanted to live safely and in harmony in that community.
Yeah.
Yeah, that was a long term thing. And that's by referral. I can't go around there every day, every week. That's not what you're there for.
No.
Yeah. It's like counselling. People will go on to do counselling. That's not our job. We're not counsellors.
No. It's interesting. So the long term is, I suppose, referring to other services that can kind of help sustain their, I suppose, if they need real help with, I suppose...
To make the broader point is this. If you're dealing with hate crime issues, you do have to look at the long term, but onward referral is part of your job. Yeah?
Yeah.
It doesn't all end with tea and biscuits in a conference room.
No, from my own experiences, I suppose there's a lot of aftercare that needs to be done as well after these things, because a lot of this stuff can linger.
Yeah.
So
yeah,
no, absolutely. That's a very practical, sensible approach to it.
That last case, for example, which really didn't go to any meaningful long-term discussion. I went to both parties and we discussed it, and I took information back and forwards. But you said yourself, sometimes it doesn't work.
Yeah.
And I agree with you. And I was talking with another very experienced practitioner who we were dealing with serious violent and sexual cases, and we both agreed that if you were going to work with someone who said, "Oh, it works every time, there's never been a case where I've said no," I would treat them with suspicion. Yeah, because I think you do need to know when it's too dangerous to go ahead.
I think that
you've got to give evidence that you can handle that decision.
And also I think that comes back to something you mentioned before, which is the risk that some people may get coerced into it.
Yeah.
And that may very well be a case where if someone, that could be a case where someone would coerce someone else into it, even if it wasn't in their best interest.
It starts like this, doesn't it? I come to you and say, I'm a policeman, this is how we deal with this kind of case. I offer you no choice. I can say to you, look, this is in the interest of everybody. I'd like you to come and meet this guy because it helps us stop him doing it again to anybody else. So I'm going to have to give him a moral duty. I can say the only way I can really deal with your case properly is if you help me by doing this. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Now I'm starting to put pressure on you. And I know of one which we scrutinised. Where someone was beaten up by a customer, and the police said, look, the person who beat you up is, you've got to think of what the effects might be on them. They might lose their job if they get a conviction. Do you want to be responsible for that?
Right, I see.
Yeah, much better to do it this way.
Yeah, that's...
And that person was involved in licensed premises, and who controls the licensed premises trade? Police do. Police input. Yeah. So if I want to go for a license, or then the police can say, could put an objection in. Yeah. No, not that. That wasn't the case. That wasn't the case. But if that's my position, yeah. If that's my position, I'm in a very difficult situation. I can't say no. So it isn't always valid.
No,
And coercion is a potential problem. They did some cases, there was a university in the Midlands, I can't remember the name now, where they did some work on this, and they found that in some cases police were routinely putting down domestic incidents as dealt with by restorative means, because you go to the door and say you don't want to come back, this is okay, isn't it? You sure you're okay? Right, fine. Quick tick box, away we go. Dangerous stuff.
Because then it's not being...
That was dealt with, I think.
Yeah.
I think they take it more seriously now, but it was seen as a quick, bureaucratic way of solving cases.
Because that's actually, I don't think the question's on here, but now this is something that's piqued my interest, is this role of bureaucracy in restorative justice. So would you say it's quite, because I know that was prevalent in that case, but would you say it's been an issue in any other that you can think of? Or in just generally in the field?
I think the state of policing, I'm not sure about the prosecution of cases. Police are pressured to get immediate results. They're pressured to, and some people believe that restorative justice can cure everything, and you go on a course and you come out being a great believer. But the problem goes back to power. If you put the uniform on and you go out and you advise people who are in distress, they will listen to you and trust you. Sometimes they don't have any other recourse anyway. So it's quite difficult to say no to police, isn't it?
Yes, it is. As a social scientist, stuff like stats is stuff like, I can't remember the term for it, but it's kind of part of that performance. Performance sounds very insincere, but what I mean by that is in the kind of social structure of things. When you see someone in a uniform, you think, oh, I should probably listen to them because they are a figure of authority. Therefore, you have to play along.
Yeah.
That's kind of what I mean by performance. So, yeah, that's a very big part of social interactions, because then once we assume our roles of the authority figure and the figure who's under authority, then how that dialogue plays out will be very different to if they weren't wearing the uniform, I suppose, in some cases. Sorry, social scientists.
We've moved away, but yes, it's valid. Yeah, it's valid. Sorry.
So actually, that's what. Yeah. But what I want to ask is, do you think there's a place for restorative justice, I suppose, more generally in terms of... Because I know we've kind of discussed how it works. It depends on the situation, but I think...
We have, as you said at the beginning, we have a society which has become much more polarised. We haven't discussed religion.
We haven't.
Maybe when there's not time.
Yeah.
But we haven't. I mean, radicalisation we haven't discussed.
No, that's a very.
But if you're talking about hatred, killing people is kind of pretty much hatred to me. And the fear and true hatred that's building up because of it, has built up in our community. It's something that has to be addressed. And you're only going to do it through dialogue, and that hasn't really happened yet, except in small pockets. There is another way. This is my little idea of development of restorative justice that I think would work and should be used a lot more. There is the concept of using circles, which has been circles of support and accountability. Not sitting in a big circle, which is another form of doing can do that. You can use big circles to get communities together. We can facilitate a big discussion.
Yeah.
So a macro discussion. That has been done and can be done. But circles of support and accountability were used for, I think still are some places in this country, they're certainly used abroad, for sexual offenders when they are released of the community. So you get a group of people who are prepared to not act as mentors, but to facilitate with somebody. They'll come out and they'll have to discuss what they've been doing and what they're looking for work and all the rest of it. I think I'm very much victim focused, probably. I think we could use circles we could build up, that a practitioner could build up, or help someone, empower them to build up their circles. The person who was trapped within a domestic relationship and not allowed any contact, part of the process could be to build up their circle of support. And to get them stronger so that they start to talk to people and express themselves and know to get help rather than to hide away from it.
Yeah.
They've lost those, perhaps they've never had those social skills. But you could get people who would agree to become their supporter and maybe formalise for a few months or whatever. And you could do the same thing with the offender. And so that slowly you could interlink those two circles to bring the peace, the settlement that's required.
Yeah.
And I think there are people out there who'd like to do that, and I think that could be used within communities where there has been a complete breakdown, to the effect that we're saying that it's okay to strap on an explosive belt or to take out the knife or hire the car and mow people down. We've got to do something about that, and you may not believe in Islam. A lot of decent people, a lot of decent Muslims don't believe in that kind of sectarianism.
No.
I mean, using that as one example, thinking of the Northern Ireland sectarianism as well, and maybe just using restorative methods and using dialogue on a slightly more formal basis than talking across the fence. Maybe that can be made to work more.
Give people.
So that's what I think isn't me doing. We could be using that.
Yeah, as a form of network, give people a support network that need them, because I can absolutely see that being a thing. Yeah, I very much agree with you. But it's a very interesting idea for it, how to be used.
But that's probably enough for today, I think. I'm sure we've overrun.
Listen,
you've got an editing job to do.
Yeah, it's been an absolute pleasure talking to you.
Yeah, likewise.
Yeah. So thank you very much for your time.
Yeah.